Hello again, this is Chris Gregory, and welcome to my podcast, A Head Full of Ideas. Head Full of Ideas is a series of random reflections on Bob Dylan. Today we're going to focus on one of Bob Dylan's perhaps most painful songs, the wedding song from 1974. And this is called Your Love Cuts Like a Knife. In the closing months of 1973, Bob Dylan was back in the studio recording a proper album of new songs, his first for over 3 years. The resulting Planet Waves, the only studio album on which the band backed him, was seen as somewhat underwhelming at the time, and has always stood in the shadow of the following year's stunning Blood on the Tracks. The album presents a fascinating series of contrasts. It is clearly a transitional work. It's still dominated by songs of loving marital bliss, such as the cheerfully swinging opener On a Night Like This, the straightforwardly corny songs of devotion Hazel and You Angel You, and the songs of reflective nostalgia for the days of his youth, Something There Is About You and Never Say Goodbye. Tough Mama, which is something of a showcase for the band's choppy funk, is more equivocal, implying that the relationship being depicted is rather problematical. The melodic and wistful Going, Going, Gone appears to be depicting a personal inner journey, although its message is somewhat muted by rather vague imagery. This was a song which, when it was played live on the 1978 tour, Dylan completely rewrote all the lyrics. On all these songs, the band's playing is as masterful and tasteful as you would expect, although Dylan's failure to position his vocals against those of their three great singers, Levon Helm, Rick Danko and Richard Manuel, is perhaps surprising. In the stark piano ballad Dirge and the acoustic closer Wedding Song, Dylan took us into a different realm of self-doubt. But the tracks which perhaps sum up the album's dualistic nature best are actually the two recordings of the unashamedly sentimental Forever Young. Yes, I know Forever Young is one of Bob Dylan's best known songs, but it really is unashamedly sentimental, isn't it? On Planet Waves, Dylan seems to be a bit worried about this, to the extent that he includes two versions of the song, one of which he takes slowly and reverently, while the faster version is presented almost as a kind of throwaway, as if he's somehow mocking the words of the song, which is of course very sweetly dedicated to one of his newborn children. It's since become a Dylan standard, spawning countless cover versions. On the Nashville Skyline and New Morning albums, Dylan had presented himself in a radically different way to that of his earlier work. Gone were the epic songs full of surreal juxtapositions of language which had appeared between 1965 and 1968. Dylan's songs now express the joy of being a settled family man in an engaging and direct manner. Songs like the exquisite I Threw It All Away, the romantic Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You, and his most stripped-down love song, If Not For You, were notable for their expression of sincere emotion. Lay Lady Lay and One More Weekend were winsome and sexy. The songs were written when Dylan was in a self-imposed retreat from the highly pressurised world of constant touring and media attention. They used sentimentality and clichés playfully, in the manner of the great country songs which had inspired them. Dylan's influence on the music of the 1960s was of course profound. He provided a definitive model for other poetic singer-songwriters to follow. But during this relatively fallow period, there was a distinct sense that his contemporaries were overtaking him. Neil Young's After the Gold Rush, Joni Mitchell's Blue, Jackson Browne's Late for the Sky, and Leonard Cohen's Songs of Love and Hate were all powerful collections in which love and relationships were viewed in a far more nuanced manner than on New Morning or most of Planet Waves. Some singers around this time even composed songs lamenting Dylan's lack of engagement with difficult issues. In Joan Baez's heartfelt, if perhaps rather patronising, Song for Bobby, 1972, she expressed her hope that he might return to writing political or protest material. A similar sentiment appeared in Song for Bob Dylan on David Bowie's brilliant 1971 album Hunky Dory, in which the soon-to-be Ziggy Stardust presented a passionate appeal to Dylan to give us back our unity, give us back our family, your every nation's refugee. When Blood on the Tracks and Desire were released, Dylan answered such appeals by delivering albums whose songs had a depth, originality, and perhaps most importantly, a cutting edge of unsentimental artistic truth-seeking, which were at least comparable to his great work of the mid-60s. Desire even included an authentic protest song in the form of Hurricane. On Blood on the Tracks, he invented startling new ways of dissecting relationships, presenting a series of narratives that defied the conventional laws of time and space. No other album defined the post-1960s disillusionment of the mid-70s with more eloquence. On some of the symbolic tracks on Desire, like Isis and Oh Sister, he disguised his personal feelings behind a series of shifting narrative perspectives and mythical constructs. But on Sarah, the frankly autobiographical last track on the album, he opened his heart to the world by openly pleading with his wife to forgive him for his unfaithfulness. Although the critics raved at his recovery of his mojo, there is little doubt, however, that the reawakening of his poetic ambition and his political consciousness in these cathartic works came at an excruciatingly difficult personal cost. The implication seemed to be that in order for him to fully realise his potential as a poet and a musician, his own personal happiness would have to be sacrificed. Early on in his career, Dylan had come under the very strong influence of the French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud. According to Rimbaud, it was necessary for a poet to literally derange himself in order to produce great work. Your senses thus had to be scrambled using any kind of substances you could find to scramble them, and only then could you produce poetic work of great intensity. Perhaps if you were just living a blissful life with your wife and all your lovely children, then there wasn't a lot to say. And this, of course, is the dilemma that Dylan was facing at this stage in his career. Planet Wave stands as the album which marks the transition between one phase and another. The similarity of Wedding Song to the material on Blood on the Tracks has often been noted. The song had been hurriedly composed towards the end of the sessions. It purported to be a devotional hymn to his wife, but its tone of manic intensity revealed a kind of inner desperation that gave it more urgency and resonance than the other songs on the album. The opening line begins with a conventional sentiment, "I love you more than ever," but this is succeeded by the strange comparison more than time and more than love. The pronouncement by a lover that his love will last forever occurs in countless songs, but in the oxymoronic phrase more than time, Dylan abstracts this in a decidedly jarring way. The juxtaposition of this with more than love suggests that what he is referring to as love here is actually a kind of unhealthy obsession. Not content with this disturbing parallel, he then stretches the comparisons even further. "I love you more than madness," he proclaims, "more than dreams upon the sea. I love you more than life itself. You mean that much to me." The tone is harsh and bitter. The sentiment is a million miles away from the beautifully blissful vignette "Never Say Goodbye," which precedes it. The feeling it communicates is close to the harshly cynical denial of a song like "It Ain't Me, Babe," even if the sentiments being expressed appear to be completely different. In the next three verses, all of which follow a similar musical pattern, the narrator relates how his wife had saved him from his own demons. "Ever since you walked right in, the circle's been complete. I've said goodbye to haunted rooms and faces in the street. He describes his devotion and gratitude to her in the most extreme terms. You gave me babies, 1, 2, 3. What is more, you saved my life. We are left in no doubt that he loves his babies, but that part of him resents being trapped in the relationship. He now appears to portray himself as a victim of this love. In the song's most revealing line, he follows this with the monosyllabically deadpan eye for eye and tooth for tooth. Your love cuts like a knife. The line directly quotes from Leviticus 24:20. Breach for breach, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he hath caused a blemish in a man, so shall it be done to him. What is he saying here? Is he seeking some kind of revenge? The quotation, which is reiterated at several other points in the Bible, describes the ancient Hebrew belief in a law of retribution. The contrast with the line about babies 1, 2, 3 is quite literally vicious, and in the middle of such a passionate declaration of love is rather disturbing. In most songs, a phrase like babies 1, 2, 3 would indicate cheerful contentment, but here it almost sounds like an accusation, as if he's counting out the responsibilities she has loaded onto him. The next lines extend this sudden, uncomfortable insight into the singer's fears. My thoughts of you don't ever rest. They'd kill me if I lie. I'd sacrifice the world for you and watch my senses die. The implication seems to be that the price the singer has paid for the personal redemption of marital love and bliss is the sacrifice of his own senses, of his own engagement with the deeper sources of his inspiration. In those years of domestic bliss, Dylan had adopted his wife Sarah as his muse. In If Not For You and The Man in Me, he had defined his love as the centre of his world, the one thing in his life that gave it real spiritual meaning, without whom winter would have no spring. But now he seems to have come to the realization that for him to return to producing poetic songs of the kind of complexity he had achieved in the mid-60s, his comfortable existence would have to be torn apart. This is the kind of sentiment that appears in many a country song, as the protagonist decides to take a lonesome road. But what is especially unusual about Wedding Song is that the narrator does not even pretend to be virtuous. This woman has saved his life, but now he is being decidedly cruel to her. He projects himself as an entirely unsympathetic narrator. It is thus perhaps not surprising that he abandoned the song after it was featured a number of times in the acoustic set of the 1974 tour. In the more sophisticated Blood on the Tracks, he was at least able to disguise the pain he was expressing behind a number of characters and time-shifting scenarios. Even in Sarah, he romanticizes the object of the song and waxes nostalgic about playing on a beach with her and his children. But here there is little doubt that this is the undisguised voice of Dylan himself, spewing out his inner resentments. He's not even pretending to be a reasonable person. He presents himself as being an entirely selfish and quite possibly misogynistic figure. There is no self-censorship here, only a singer confessing his own sins with utterly disarming honesty. I love you more than ever, he confesses, and it burns me to the soul. And later, even more disturbingly, I love you more than blood. In a later verse, Dylan expands the scope of the song to answer those critics who demanded he speak for them, or, in Bowie's words, give them back their unity. Here he claims that he is utterly incapable of filling such a role. It's never been my duty to remake the world at large, he sings, nor is it my intention to sound the battle charge. Here he seems to be quite explicitly rejecting the voice of a generation role in favour of his devotion to his wife. And yet the song presents him as being embattled, as if he's fighting a war with his own conscience and losing. Wedding Song is thus perhaps his most frightening piece of work. Here Dylan truly faces up to the real burden of his romantic devotion to poetry. Although he has achieved true happiness and contentment in his personal life, in order to rediscover his devotion to his poetic muse, he will soon have to throw it all away. In the final verses, Dylan lapses into romantic cliches, trying to persuade his wife that he and she are bound together by fate. You're the other half of what I am, you're the missing piece. He claims that I could never let you go no matter what goes on. But none of this is convincing to us or to the wife being addressed. The true power of the song lies beneath the surface. The listener is positioned as if they are the singer's almost certainly wronged wife. The husband is presenting us here with a series of unconvincing self-justifications, very probably for unspoken infidelities or unacceptable behaviour. Much of this is expressed through Dylan's delivery of the song. He rushes through the verses, paying little attention to the melody, as if he is conveying a series of overwrought emotions in the midst of a furious domestic row. This is an area that few singers have ever dared to enter. The song presents a picture of a shocking emotional catharsis which prepares us for what is to come on the albums that will soon succeed Planet Waves. It demonstrates to us in no uncertain terms the personal price that poets must pay in the process of digging deep inside themselves to expose their feelings to the world, even if in doing so they may present themselves in a wholly unsympathetic way. Wedding Song is Dylan's strangest and most painful love song. It's not an easy listen. Well, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. You can read a text version of this talk on my website, which is chrisgregory.org. That's Chris Gregory, all one word. The website's called From the Pen of Chris Gregory. Has quite a lot of writing on Dylan and a number of other subjects, as well as some poems and short stories. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter if you look for the Pen of Chris Gregory. See you next time.